Glad you're here to join us tonight. We're coming to you from the Cambria Hotel, which is in McAllen, Texas. And they've been kind enough to lend us this room. We've got a lot of great people that are going to talk to you tonight, that are going to tell you what we saw today when we went to the border. And we're going to start off with just going through a few preliminary things, as we always talk about. Let's just see if I can find my cursor here. You are entering a speak freely zone. So that means anything you want to say tonight about this controversial topic, the border, you're free to say, and you're free to talk about while we're getting into it. I happen to see the speak freely zone is something that came from Vivek Ramaswamy. And I happened to see this from him today when he said, talking about the border, and that an open border is no border. And I thought I'd share that with you. That's a slide from Vivek. And Leanne, let's go ahead and share that PowerPoint if we can. Hold on, we're just working through a few little technical things. It's amazing how hard live TV is to work on when you've got a couple hours to pull it off. But we are working on it, so just bear with us just 1 minute. Couple other things that we want to tell you. And while we get that share up, so there you go. So there's Vivek. Now we're on track. I just wanted to send a message and thank the EmpowerU team back in Cincinnati tonight. Betty Overstreet, Jill Google, Bill Roll, Jay Grunke, one of our producers, Leanne Cartier, Ken Bowman, Karen Cartier, Joe Platt, Nita Thomas, Barb Horwitz, John O'Neill, and Tom Hagedorn. We've got a great board, really appreciative to everybody for your help. So, hey, a big shout out. I think I can do it. Tonight is my wife's and my 42nd anniversary. She's being a really good sport about me not being there. It's kind of a mean thing to do, but dear, I love you. Happy 42nd anniversary. It's been a great time. Thank you. And also a big shout out to our friend Brian Thomas, who talks about all of our EmpowerU events on 55 KRC. We really appreciate everything Brian does for us. Thanks, Brian. So, hey, look, we're a free university. We do this for free. We would just ask that if you come and watch our classes, that you kick in a few bucks. You can do that online when you have the chance on our website, or you can contribute when you sign up for a class. And remember, all our classes, including this one, are available the next day on empoweruamerica.org. So I've got, as many of you know, we always have a required reading article. Tonight, that article goes along with our subject that we're talking about, and that's the border. And this is an article where Ron DeSantis says he will look to end birthright citizenship if elected. That's a new initiative. Ron DeSantis came down to the border yesterday, so we were kind of not in the same place, but that's what he talked about, and I think that's a big initiative. So that article, you can see it on empoweruamerica.org, and you can read it when you have an opportunity, so check it out. We always have a couple of online giveaways that we give away, and we'll try to name those people at the end. But the first online winner, which will be one of you, you don't have to do anything. We'll just tell you at the end if you won, is this book on Ronald Reagan, The Great Communicator, which I saw, which really looked good. And it's by Dick Worthland, and he talks about what Ronald Reagan taught me about politics, leadership, and life. So check that out. And then the second online winner is going to be a book called George Washington Was a Badass by Bill O'Neill. And Bill talks about that there's little doubt that the first true badass was in American history, and that was George Washington. So stay tuned. Hopefully you will be one of the winners of tonight's giveaway. So we aren't just going to be stopping what we're doing tomorrow night in the studio. June 28th, we have an incredible documentary that's narrated by Dennis Quaid, the actor. He's taken a real interest in the subject of our power grid. We're going to be showing the documentary in Cincinnati at EmpowerU Studio called Grid Down, Power Up. We've only got maybe 15 or 20 spots left in the studio. So if you want to check that out, you'll have to sign up online. It's going to be great. McAllen, Texas today, 103 degrees. I can't remember being in an area where it was so hot. And we were out, and at one of the stops, it was just, we were only out maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes. We were by the Rio Grande. We'll show you some pictures. The heat was just stifling. Here's the team right here. We have Leanne Cartier, our producer, down here today. We have George Brenneman, who will be on a little later. We have the great executive director, Betty Overstreet, and me. This is in front of the Trump wall on the border. So a few facts to start out. Speaking of the wall, everybody, so much we talked about the wall today. There's 458 miles of border wall system consisting mostly of 18 to 30 feet steel bollards. The southern border from where we're at, which is the Rio Grande area, all the way to San Diego, is 2,000 miles long. McAllen is in the Rio Grande sector. There's 9 different sectors of the borders. We're in the one all the way to the right, all the way down at the tip. And after 2013, this area we were in had almost half of all the illegal immigrants in the United States. It slowed down some. Tucson is now the largest area for illegal immigration. In a little while, you're going to hear from the border chief that was in Tucson in Yuma when they had the most immigrants coming across the border. So a couple things, I just need to set kind of the groundwork for you and talk about a few facts. So encounters on the 2,000-mile border have tripled since 2021. In fiscal 2022, 6,000 migrants entered a day. In 2023, this year, 7,000 a day. The former Homeland Security Jay Johnson said, I cannot imagine 1,000 encounters and what it would look like. It would totally overwhelm the system. And then later he said in 2019, how would 4,000 encounters, how would we even deal with that? So what those numbers mean, the 7,000 a day, they equate to 2.4 million people entering the United States a year. On top of that 2.4 million, there's about 1.2 million people that are just getting in. In other words, the border knows they're here. They saw them on technology. We're going to show you some pictures of that. They know they're around, but they can't stop them. They're getaways. So there's 3.6 million people coming into the country. Of the 3.6 million people, about 2/3 of those people, they run out of room to hold them. They just let them go into the interior of the United States to places like Cincinnati, Ohio. About 1/3 are sent back to their homes. I'm not really sure why they're sent back, what excuse they use to send them back. Maybe one of our guests will tell us tonight. So under Joe Biden, we've had 6.3 million illegal immigrants enter the United States. That's equal to the entire country of El Salvador or Nicaragua. That's a quantity of illegals that is greater than the population. Hear this, that's greater than the population of 35 different states. So where do we get the 2/3 number of people that are being put into the country? Well, in May of this year, there were 32,000 border crossers that came across. 11,000 of those were turned away and 21,000 were released waiting a court date. That court date sometimes can go 2 or 3 years off into the future. The average amount of time a migrant spends at the border, 3 to 4 days. So how many total illegal immigrants are there in the United States? So if you take 2/3, I'm not trying to bog you down with numbers, of the 3.6 million people, that means 2.4 million people are entering every year. So in 2018, the USA statistics said there were 11.4 million immigrants. Now in 2023, it's estimated there are 16.8 million immigrants in the United States. So the data is a little sketchy. It's almost like the government doesn't want you to know how many immigrants are really in the United States. But let's say 2.4 million people are entering each year. That's 2/3 of the 3.6 million. If there are 16.8 million immigrants now, and then there are 2.4 million in 2023 and 2.4 million in 2024, that means in 2024, when Joe Biden goes out of office, there are going to be about 21.6 million people, illegal immigrants in the United States. That's about 6.5% to 7% of the entire population. Just a couple other facts, and I'm not going to bog you down. So about 5% of the population now is illegal immigrants, and about 820,000 of those estimated illegals are considered criminal aliens by the Department of Homeland Security. That's 820,000 illegal immigrants. 6 states hold 59% of the illegal immigrants: California, Texas, Florida, New York, New Jersey, Illinois. 25% live in California. 51% are women, and the average age is about 43.9%. This statistic is troublesome. In 2022, the Border Patrol apprehended 98 people who were on the watch list, terrorist list at the southern border. It's estimated that they missed 114 terrorists. That means last year, 212 terrorists entered the country and are now in the United States. This little graph shows you a map of where they tend to be congregated across the United States. For those of you in the Ohio area, you see them in Cincinnati, you see them in Columbus. You obviously see New York, there's 40,000 there. Miami is a huge concentration. Houston, Los Angeles. What's the cost of the illegal immigration? It's estimated that the cost is $150 billion a year. And that includes a lot of stuff that may not even be counted. Like I heard today on one of the buses about the number of teachers that are having to be hired because where the immigrants are located, nobody can understand them and they can't figure out a way to really teach them effectively. There are so many hidden costs in what we're going to learn about tonight. Not only do we have the problem with the cost, we've got the problem with human trafficking. We've got the problem with cartels. Look at how many cartels there are in Mexico. They're everywhere. Look at the red area. That's the area that's closest to where we're at right now. Just a couple last few things. Women, when they're trying to get in the US, and they're into sexual slavery to pay off their debts to cartels. Older men might have to work as drug mules to pay off theirs. So what we see today, we saw a lot. This is an example of what the wall looked like. This is an area where we were able to drive through the wall. This is a Trump wall. And there's a lot of mishmash walls. It would really surprise you. It would disappoint you. That may be the word one of our guests uses. It would disappoint you that there's so many variations of the walls. They don't meet. There's obvious areas where people can walk through them. You have to just wonder, what kind of a system could we have ever created to put a plan like this in place? This was a wall built in 2006. In many cases, I don't know if you can see this picture, the walls don't meet. You've got a bush wall running into a Trump wall with a huge gap right in the middle that you could drive a truck through. The one thing about the area down here, it's a pretty safe area in McAllen until you start going towards the border. Brownsville is pretty safe too. Brownsville is said to be the 3rd safest city in the United States. You might almost say to yourself, that doesn't make sense. But the commerce is just, there's fruit going across the border, there's energy, there's an hour-and-a-half delay for trucks, for commerce to get to Mexico and the other way around. And commerce seems very good. So Rio Grande, this is the river, this is where the border is. And I learned today that you have to draw a line down the middle of the river. And if you're on the Mexican side is halfway on the river, the American side is on the other side of the river. And what that means is when the cartels bring people across, what they do is they stay on the half that's the Mexican side. This is Othel Brand Jr., one of the most dynamic speakers that we spoke to today. He's president of the Waterworks here, which is a private company. And we had a video, we're still trying to see if we can get it ready to show you tonight, but he gave us an incredibly passionate talk about his employees and how terrible it is that the whole entire area has been overrun. And if you don't live in the city of McAllen, there's no way you could live in the county because you could just be overrun with people coming and just taking over your house, just coming and knocking on your door and telling you to get out. And that everyone has moved into the city because I believe I've got this right. There's a ratio of 1 police officer to 45 people, but if you're out in the county, it's just terrible. And Othell talked about the fact that this just wasn't America. This isn't what he grew up with when he used to go out fishing and boating on the river with his dad. And it was just it was hard to hear if this is multiplied all across the 2,000 miles of the southern border. This is a ramp Othell built. He partnered with the Border Patrol to try to collect illegal immigrants. He built this. He put cameras on top of his building where the Border Patrol could try to watch for the illegal immigrants. Put signs up. These signs are everywhere around the Rio Grande. You're prohibited from coming in here. This is a technology that's on the border called the Aerostat technology. It's about $2.5 million. And I'm told you can see your face from about 2 miles away. It looks a little bit like one of those Chinese balloons that we heard so much about. George Brenneman's going to talk to you about the incredible trip we took to Catholic Charities. And it was just a great area. They can hold up to 1,200 people. And they're right across the street from the bus station. And there were lots of children in there. So we had just a fantastic trip today. This was an opening in the wall we took in the Rio Grande zone. One other interesting thing, we saw National Guard trucks, unmarked cars, and they were actually patrolling the border and helping the Border Patrol. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start hearing from the people who were on our incredible trip today. And I thought I'd bring in Ezra Escudero, who is with Americans for Prosperity. And Ezra, I've known for a long time, and he was kind enough, he and Americans for Prosperity were kind enough to invite 40 people from the states of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois to come. And I'm going to let Ezra tell you what the vision of Americans for Prosperity is. Ezra.
Thank you, Dan. And I really appreciate your tremendous sacrifice of time and effort, bringing all this equipment and helping us to share this message with folks online, back in Ohio, across the country, across the world. And as always, my respect and thanks to the EmpowerU team from Betty on out, everyone that helps make this possible.
Cool.
You know, for me, one of the recurring messages that I heard time and time again today, and on a previous border trip I was privileged to take, is the failure of policy, right? I don't want to steal anyone else's thunder from who's going to join us later this evening, but time and again, the goodwill exists, as we saw here in McAllen, from local community leaders and volunteers and activists to help take care of the humanitarian dimension of the crisis. We've heard from Border Patrol agents that have the passion and the desire to protect this country, and the technology, tools, and resources all exist. As you saw, so many of them were actually just left to rust, not because the physical barriers couldn't be built, not because the equipment didn't exist, not because the money wasn't there, but because one executive order in one moment overruled a previous executive order, and bad policy has created a crisis that all Americans across the country are paying a price for. So one of the things we are most passionate about, the Americans for Prosperity Foundation and our sister organizations, and through our efforts, is we've got to work to share this message, these experiences across the country, that by educating ourselves on some of the better policy prescriptions we can learn about and support and share the message about, we can fix these problems in the border. We can deal with the humanitarian dimension of this crisis. We can have a secure frontier across North America, but we've got to start by educating ourselves first. And that's what this big investment has been all about.
So I kind of took your vision, maybe I've got it wrong, but I want to ask you, your vision was you bring 40 people down here who are kind of involved in a lot of adventures like EmpowerU, where they're meeting with people, and those 40 people tell 5 different people, and then those 5, and the idea is it's just a force multiplier. And hopefully at some point, if we tell enough people, give enough people the information, that we're maybe going to get something done. Is that kind of what we're trying to do?
Absolutely. You know, when you look at our guiding principles and the very ideas that motivate who we are, what we do, and how we do it, we don't believe that a top-down approach dictated from Washington, D.C. is going to be the answer to our problems. We believe in bottom-up solutions. We believe that we have the ideas across the country that can make our nation more prosperous, more secure, where we can help more people, both coming to the border and in other countries. And what you're seeing is that that's the investment we're making by building that base of folks that can go tell others. Now, you and I are going to be able to go back to Ohio and say, I've been to the border. I've seen the crossings. I've been to the social service agencies and seen the kids and the families that are there. Give me a minute and listen to my story and the ideas that can really solve these problems. That's how we're going to fix this.
You know, you're right. When we were in McAllen today, there were so many people that seemed to want to help out. Everybody in McAllen seemed to be on the same page, and it's like they're just looking for somebody, like you said, to come up with the policies that actually make sense. And why we can't do that, it's just hard to understand.
That could be a whole other podcast right there.
You're right. Hey, listen, we really appreciate you bringing the team down here, and thanks. It's always good to see you, and appreciate you coming in, Ezra.
Likewise, thank you. And Ohio, we will be back, and we're going to share this story all over the state.
Thank you, Ezra. Appreciate you coming in. We'll give you a round of applause. Next, we're going to hear from Jordan Fischetti, who covers immigration policy for AFP. And when we had a chance to talk to Jordan, hey Jordan, welcome. We're really glad to have you in EmpowerU.
Thank you.
Appreciate you wearing the green EmpowerU shirt, and we're really glad to have you. Let's wave for the picture. Hi. Thanks again, Ezra. Appreciate you coming in. So, Jordan, you talked last night. You're kind of the leader of this team down at AFP. You're an immigration attorney. Tell everybody what you do.
So I'm an AFP Immigration Policy Fellow, and my main role actually is to provide research stats for the government affairs team, the comms team at AFP, so they can be equipped with the right knowledge to bring to lawmakers, to bring to the press. But lately, I've actually taken on another role, which is helping to lead these border trips. This is actually the third border trip, and I'm staying in McAllen after this one for another border trip. And the idea, as you mentioned before, is to bring people down from all over the country so they can see what's happening for themselves. Ultimately, whether you're right wing or left wing, you hear about a version of the border by the media, which is somewhat true, but there's a lot missing out. There's a lot of different missing pieces. There's a security element, there's the private landowner element, there's a humanitarian element. And our hope on these trips is that people can get to see the border for themselves, come up with their own solutions. Then, like you said earlier, act as force multipliers, telling their friends will tell their friends, until finally our lawmakers finally get the will to do what needs to be done.
Yeah, and so how many trips have you sponsored so far?
So this is our third trip so
Okay.
far. Our fourth trip will be right here. You guys are leaving tomorrow, and then a fresh crop of people are coming in tonight.
That's great. And are you still an immigration attorney, or?
No, I'm not anymore. So I left that 2 years ago, and
Uh-huh.
then I started with AFP literally 3 days later.
And can you give us some sense on some of the when you're trying to plan policy for immigration policy, what are some of the things you're looking at?
So, I mean, we're looking at a whole variety of things. So when it comes to border, for instance, obviously the first thing you want to look at is what's going on at the border. And what we heard a lot today is not just failure of policy, but we heard this from Ethel Brand at the water plant. We heard this from Chief Clem, the retired sector chief of Yuma, Arizona, that we need boots on the ground, we need infrastructure, we need technology. If you have one without the other two, it's not good enough. There are times where a wall's good, there's time where a wall's not enough. There are times where technology is good, there's times where technology can't see around the corner or can't see through bushes. People are fantastic, but you could have 30, 40,000 people, and if you don't have a wall and technology to back them up, they're not going to be able to apprehend everyone they need to. But then beyond that, we look also at legal immigration. If people have an easier pathway to come here legally, they're less likely to come illegally, which will allow Border Patrol to better focus on apprehending people who present a threat to us. Rather than, as we heard today, they're spending 80% of their time processing people and 20% of the time in the field. They want that to be the opposite.
Well, can you talk about that a little bit? I heard a quote today. I can't remember if Betty or if anybody remembers it, but that we need to have a very secure border, but we need to have a wide gate. Was that the quote? Or
So tall fences, wider gate.
tall fences, wider gate.
Yeah.
And the concept is, we should have a robust immigration system, just like we've had throughout the history of the United States. Can you give us any idea on how many people are coming in? I went over the statistics of what I think, how many illegal immigrants there are in the United States. Can you talk about legal immigration and how much there is?
So legal immigration, I believe it's roughly about 1 million people that are getting their green cards each year. But some of those people are people coming from abroad. Some people are people that are already in America and are adjusting status to permanent residency.
Okay.
And there's actually a study done back in 2018 where I think something like 32 million people wanted to immigrate to the US, but only 1 million got in. Many just gave up because it's so difficult to immigrate here legally.
And in your work with Americans for Prosperity, is it your sense that there should be more immigration than that? Or like I gave the statistic before you came in the room that there last year, there were about 2.4 illegal immigrants that got in, and that was after the 1.2 million that got sent out. So should it be more than 1 million people, or what's your sense on that?
So I don't necessarily have an exact number. I think that's something that we probably best decided by supply and demand. Unfortunately, we have an immigration system that is anything but conducive to supply and demand. If you're an employer, you want to hire somebody, you've got to go through a process with 4 different agencies that can take upwards of 3 years with backlogs sometimes of 10, 15, 20 years. Essentially, the government's saying, hire people illegally. So the exact number, I don't have one, but certainly what we're doing right now is not working out for anybody.
What should be the first couple steps that would be most logical for the government to do?
I think the first couple steps that would be logical, you need to figure out, okay, where do we build a wall? The problem is that the wall has been associated with some policies that people didn't like with the ex-president. But the fact is the wall is actually a very good method for controlling immigration. Another problem is the way that President Trump himself talked about it. He said, we're going to build a big, beautiful wall, keep people out. So then opponents can say, well, no, people go around the wall, people go through the wall, people go over the wall, but that's a false choice. The purpose of a wall is not to stop people, it's to slow them down.
Yeah, and what we learned today is it's not all the government's fault. There's a lot of obstacles to that wall being built. First of all, there's private land that you can't go through without
Right.
taking it by eminent domain. And as we all learned at lunch today, we went through a butterfly a butterfly museum, and so the wall couldn't be built because no way we could impact the butterflies, right? So I mean, there's lots of obstacles to that happening. But what would the first couple things be that should be done?
So I say that we need more personnel. I mean, he stepped down recently, but the ex-chief Will Ortiz was saying they're understaffed by about 3,000 people. Border Patrol has been around 19,000 for the last like 7-8 years.
The story we heard today, the astounding stat we heard that there's 40,000 police officers in New York City, and there's only 20,000 Border Patrol covering the entire 2,000 person border. It's just a stat it's just hard to believe.
It is really hard to wrap your head around. And the thing is, Border Patrol is not just covering the 2,000-mile border. They're also covering the 100 miles inland. So I don't even know how many square miles that is.
Yeah, because the wall in many cases, as we learned today, the wall in some places is 6, 10, 13 miles inside the Rio Grande. It's
Yep.
It's not like you'd think that it's all along the Rio Grande. Is it your sense that okay, so let's say that the Republicans were going to throw out the current people in office now, would anything change, or would it still be just more years of them just fighting? I mean, is there anything that can be done?
I think the problem is that there's too much capital to be gained by talking about it.
Right.
It's a political football at this point. I mean, if you've ever seen a committee hearing on immigration, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 Congress people, they'll spend about 4 minutes, 45 seconds virtue signaling. Then they'll ask a loaded question for the last 15 seconds. Like I've watched 5-hour hearings and I've learned maybe 2 things, and I've learned those despite the questions that were asked. And until we, the American people, demand legislators who actually take this seriously, nothing's going to get done.
So just more gotcha football.
Exactly. Just more gotcha. I'm going to just stand up here. I'm going to flail my hand. I'm going to act really angry. If I'm on the right, I'm going to say something about fentanyl or about illegal immigrants. If I'm on the left, I'm going to talk about how the right is racist, but no one's going to actually propose solutions. No one's asking the witnesses, or very few people are asking the witnesses like legitimate questions that we could use to obtain the right information to pass the right policy. And that's actually a big purpose of these border trips is ultimately we want people to talk to their friends and talk to their friends. We want to be on the media, get the word out there that there are solutions. I said before, there's wall, personnel, better infrastructure. I talked about legal immigration. One thing that we could do is we could change the quota system. So each country is only allowed 7% of all the available green cards, whether it's employer-based or family-based. So that means some countries like India, which have a lot of talent that wants to come over here, end up waiting for years and end up going to Canada instead.
Yeah, there's just so many pieces of things that we learned about today that could easily be put into effect to work. And it's just disappointing to see. Jordan, really appreciate you coming and talking to EmpowerU. Keep up the good work with the tours and have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking me on the show.
You bet. Bye-bye. Thanks. Thanks to Jordan for talking to us a little bit about immigration policy. Next, we're going to talk to Kennedy Lefebvre, who was our tour leader today, who just knew so much about the McAllen area. And I guess kind of when we talked about doing the show, hey, Kennedy, thanks for joining us, man. It's good to see you. When we first talked about the show, when we were kind of brainstorming it, we said, oh, well, we've got to have somebody local, somebody who can tell what's really going on in McAllen and Brownsville. And that's this guy right here, right?
Yeah, I do my part.
And so
I pay property taxes here, so.
And you were saying the property taxes are high, right?
Yeah, this has nothing to do with the tour, but yeah, the percentage wise, the property taxes in this area are significantly higher than most other places in the state, which is odd considering this is actually a very low cost of living. The average house in this area is about $150,000, which is super cheap in comparison to most places, but our property taxes are a little bit higher. And that's paying for what we see on this border tour. To segue into that, you're seeing a lot of the locale having to contribute to where the federal government is failing to fulfill its duties.
Well, what I want to ask you about living in McAllen, and you said you'd been here, what, 7 years?
Yeah, almost 10 years.
So what's it like just having this constant chaos that's just kind of around you? Does it like I got into an Uber and this Uber driver, he talked to me. I swear he talked to me for 15 straight minutes about everything. I mean, does it just wear you down after a while or how is it?
I hope you gave him a 5-star review. Seems like a good guy.
I did.
But
except for the fact that he took me to a place where the best Diet Pepsi I could get. I thought everything was bigger in Texas.
Everything's bigger in Texas.
I mean, this is what I got. I'm on like a 3 Diet Pepsi deal. I mean, this just isn't what I wanted.
It's about quantity right now. So it's interesting. I was just telling this story and sharing it with some other gentlemen that was on this tour with us. Even my father, he lives in Alaska. And he's always telling me, I'm praying for you. I want you to move out of that area because what he sees on the news. Let me backtrack for just 1 second. You heard this and our audience did not hear that. But on the tour, Chief Clem talked about, remember the Border Patrol agent who had the horse and he was whipping around?
Yeah.
That happened in a single instant. But the media played that through for how many weeks?
Just forever.
Do you remember?
Yeah, it just went on
quite
forever.
a long time.
Yeah.
Now let's take that same concept and apply it to other things. We're in McAllen, Texas, the 7th safest city in the state of Texas. One of the safest cities in the entire country. Now think about the news media. They're going to see something. And I'm telling you, as a person who lives here and who's been here for nearly a decade, sometimes stuff happens and it comes and goes. But yet it's see it on the news for days, for weeks. I worked in this area I had a #1 political talk show for almost 7 of the years that I was here for the last 10. And I worked in the news agency and they constantly would send me stories, right? Sean Hannity would hit me up. Glenn Beck would hit me up. A lot of the Fox individuals there, Lise Wheel. Hey, what's it like? Are you guys okay? Are you guys okay? Well, that news is done and gone. I mean, there was an influx, there was a flow, but now that has all been taken care of. And so we have to look at it through that lens. It's always good to talk to individuals on the ground. And we've all seen the same YouTube clips and the same Instagram reels where we see TV show host number 1 and number 2 kind of saying the same thing, and they're on the other side of the country, right? And you can see that, it seems very conspiratorial. But a lot of times that happens with the AP wire, where the news will happen to you, but then by the time it gets to the other side, it's been repeated 1,000 times. And so everyone's thinking something's in problem, but it's been dealt with. So this area, to kind of backtrack here, I have 3 children. My wife is born and raised in this area, and I have 3 children. I don't think I would raise, as a good Christian father, trying to become one, raise my children in an area that is constantly overrun and war torn. I mean, we do see that in Seattle's and Baltimore's and New York City. Brooklyn used to be like that. Houston is a mecca for that. But the Rio Grande Valley is actually pretty calm and serene. Do we have problems on the border? We saw that today. There are a lot of places that we can fix that. But as a person who lives here, it's very peaceful living. We're in this nice hotel with palm trees all around us, and we're having a fun old time, connecting on these issues.
Well, other than your work with Americans for Prosperity, you told us this incredible story that I really feel everybody needs to hear about this organization you founded called Libre, which is in 12 states and 27 cities. Would you tell everyone that story you told us yesterday?
Yeah. So the Libre Initiative is a sister organization to Americans for Prosperity. And so we work together with them in a lot of ways. But before we became sisters in 2011, our founder, Daniel Garza, I had my radio show at the time, and he was a gentleman. It's his story kind of starts, the Libre story kind of starts with him when he was a high school dropout farm worker. His parents came to this country seeking a better life for their children, which is him. And he came into this country and he was going from farm to farm, state to state, following the seasons, right? Strawberries this year, corn, potatoes, whatever the case may be, from the Rio Grande Valley all the way to Yakima, Washington. And as he went there, oftentimes, and political season would come around, right? Then you have politician number 1 come into the place, and in a way kind of took them for granted. His family, they didn't speak any English. They were here following the seasons, trying and saving up money to do, to pursue the American dream for their children. But he was one of the kids that spoke English, spoke Spanish, and he would hear what was being told by more progressive politicians and said, this is not the values that my family has. But yet, oftentimes, his family and such were be pushed over to vote more progressive, because that's just the way we do things, right? That's just the way it is. So he took it upon himself to ensure that his family knew who and what was coming down, understanding the policies, and educating themselves so they can make a more informed decision. It caught wind. He was able to help out and just dissect policy and help people understand. This is a young kid, dropped out of high school. Fast forward 10 years, George W. Bush, the now sitting president of the United States of America, gives him a call based on a recommendation from a local congressman and hires him to work in the Office of Interior for Hispanic Outreach. The story of Libre started with that, and it's just letting people know what's happening. Because as you're busy trying to pursue the American dream, as you're busy working 2 jobs, trying to learn language, or even as a 5th generation American, trying to make ends meet, but yet the regulations are hampering, your property taxes go up, inflation, eggs, gas. You don't have time to know what's going on in Austin, in Detroit, Lansing, Michigan, or whatever your capital is for your state, let alone the Washington, D.C. So he wanted to continue after he left the White House to just dissect those policies, figure out, is this good or bad for you, by giving you the information so you can make an informed vote on what you want to do as a policymaker or as a policy. And so that's how Libre kind of began 10 years ago here in McAllen, in Mission, Texas, which is just right across the street here from McAllen. And that was 11 years ago. And now we're in 12 states and 27 cities.
And you told this incredible story about at one point, only 4% of the...
So when Libre started in this area, I had my radio show. Daniel just started the Libre Initiative. I worked with him on the logo, getting some information out there, putting together some awesome events, informing pastors, informing the congregation, informing individuals of what is going on in their area. That time, there was a 4% voter turnout.
4% voter turnout.
This area had a 92% Hispanic demographic, and only 4% of those individuals are actually voting. All of the policies, all of the decisions were being made by the absolute minority. Let's just fast forward to where Libre is now. you had a almost 47% voter turnout. The first time, and I'm not saying the Libre Initiative is partisan for Republican or Democrat,
Right.
but this is the first time a Republican was elected in this area at this last election cycle. And you had almost a 40-something% voter turnout.
Well,
The
just like,
job isn't over though.
Yeah,
That means 50-something% still don't vote.
just like
What
with
a
it, just,
rise.
just like with education, the challenges of educating kids, it's the same way with, educating the people coming into the area. So
And that's just not people coming to the area, but people that have lived here,
Right.
made a home, lived here for 4 generations.
that's cool.
Yeah.
That is a great story, Kennedy. And I understand we've got a Libre in Columbus, Ohio now, and maybe on the way to Cincinnati. Thanks so much for sending us the tour today and filling us in. And thank you very much. Have a great rest of your night, Kennedy. Appreciate it. Gosh, we're just going to keep on going. Next, we have Chief Clem from who's going to talk to us about his work on the Tucson border. Gosh, it was just so great to meet you today and hear you and all the stuff you told us about your message was just so much the same that you're just waiting for the policies to be put in place and everything will work, right?
Well, we hope so. I mean, when you look at what's happening on our border, I think the most important piece that I talked about today was, we don't need to conflate immigration and border security. We should be able to stand alone on securing our border. I was talking to some folks out here during dinner, and a lot of people have gates in their neighborhoods with a lock on their front door, a lock on their bedroom, and if you're fortunate to have a bathroom in your bedroom, you have a lock on that door. But we fight about putting a lock, if you will, on our border of our country to keep Americans safe. And so, so there's a lot going on, and so much of what's happening now is policy driven.
Tell us about your work at Yuma and just some of the challenges you face day to day doing your job.
Well, just for background for everybody that's watching and listening, is I started 27 and a half years ago in El Paso sector. I was in the station in New Mexico. El Paso was the sector headquarters, and my station was in Lordsburg, New Mexico. But I rose through the ranks, completely a career employee. But the last 2 years of my career before I retired, I was the chief of the Yuma Border Patrol sector. At 126 miles of border, some in California, some in Arizona. And well, I'll give you some numbers because I think the numbers tell the story. In October of 2020, we were averaging about 25 arrests a day. Then it went up to about 35 arrests a day in November. By December, it was in the 50s. By January, it was in the 70s. By February, it was 100. By May, it was 500. By the end of the fiscal year, we were averaging over 1,000 arrests a day. So the federal government talks about fiscal years October 1 to September 30th. Just for numbers, 8,800 arrests in fiscal year 20. This is just Yuma sector. 114,000 arrests in fiscal year 21 for Yuma, and 310,000 arrests in fiscal year 22 for Yuma alone. That is a policy issue because everything that we had done to get one of the most secure borders that we'd had, at least in my 27 plus years, was pretty much wiped away by a stroke of a pen saying we're not going to do that anymore. And that's put lives in danger. It's stressed out all our resources. It's stressed out communities. And if it's going to be a humanitarian crisis, we got to take care of people. And we're asking a lot from locals to expand all their resources to try to help a group of folks that shouldn't be coming this way anyway.
And talk about what happened when that transition between Trump and Biden happened, how it almost changed overnight.
Yeah, I mean, just look at those numbers, right? So we had multiple policies in place, that were working. Not everything was, I like to say the policies were effective. They were clunky, but effective.
Like what? Give me for instance.
So I'll say the Migrant Protection Protocol, which is also known as the Remain in Mexico. When we started that, there was a lot of things that were designed and dealt with in Washington, D.C., but not all the details had been worked out with Mexico. They'd been worked out in some areas, but the message didn't get to all the locations. So it took us a while to be able to remove people back to Mexico that had wanted to make an asylum claim after being in Mexico.
And let me stop and let me ask you a question now. I don't mean to get you off track,
That's
but
okay.
this whole thing about Mexico, Did you find Mexico was willing to work with the United States, or did they fight you on everything you wanted to do?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's important to make the stipulation or make this clear. When back in about 2018 and 2019, when we started seeing this wave of people coming through, we worked a lot with Mexico. I made a couple trips, or at least one trip to Mexico City, a lot of trips to Juarez, Mexico, because I was in El Paso at the time. And we had a seat at the table. We had people that were our counterparts in Mexico were willing to, hey, what is it going to take? How can we help you? Right? They created a National Guard to help, but Mexico did not have a National Guard. They created 50,000 people to be National Guard members to help secure their southern border and the northern border, which is our southern border, to help keep people from coming in and getting at the hands of the coyotes. So when the administrations changed and there was no longer some push coming from the White House, when I'd go to meet with some of the same people, in 2021, they're like, well, Chief, we really don't have the resources to do this. But a year before that, it was, what can we do to help you? How can we make this happen? So Mexico realized there wasn't any pressure coming out of Washington, D.C. to do this. And that right there makes everything even more difficult when you don't have a cooperative partner. Now on the ground level, some of my direct peers in Mexico, they were working to do the best they can, but they were not getting the support from Mexico City like they had done previously, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So the team that you led, what was the morale like when things changed? What happened?
Oh, golly. So when you go from a president of the United States that is, putting you out there as heroes, right? I mean, we know that there was a lot of Border Patrol union support for his campaign and for President Trump. That was, and he backed us, right? We were at his inauguration. I mean, he really, was very, very proud to be the president and having the U.S. Border Patrol that he supported, right? And policies were there to help keep America safe, to help give the agents the tools they needed to do the job. When President Biden took over, it was quite the opposite. And I like to give the example of, and I told the group earlier today, I was nearly 1,000 miles away when the Del Rio Horse Patrol incident happened that made headlines. Which we all know was debunked. Nobody was whipped. There was none. It was just the camera angle, and it was a great photo. And even the cameraman said that didn't happen. The president of the United States is out there saying they will be punished. That made my stomach turn. Like, how on earth could the president, say that? And then the vice president and the secretary all echoing that. That never happened from previous administrations. That was the first, really one where it's like, this isn't going to be good for us. I mean, policies, we get that when the elections happen, they're going to tilt a little bit one direction. We just want to keep America safe. We just want to do our job. We want to help people. But man, that was a big kick in the gut. And you talk about morale sinking. Oh, yeah, that was a big one.
So what is it like when you're having all these people come through and you don't have any place to process them, and you have to decide which ones just go out in the country and just go in the middle of the country and go wherever how does that feel to just send people out into your United States?
Yeah, it's tough. Well, so I look at this, and for everybody that's watching and listening, is Border Patrol is responsible for interdicting and arresting anybody and anything that comes in the United States illegally between the ports of entry. So if you enter the United States not at a port of entry, it's an illegal entry. It's a crime. It's against the law. And so we can take an administrative route, or we can take a criminal route. But when we get overwhelmed with large amounts of people, you're going to go to an administrative route, and there's just no room. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, it was responsible for detention. They don't have the resources. They were defunded, if you will, the defund ICE movement. So there's no room at the end for these people once we've processed them. So if they can't go anywhere, we have to process them and release them. And you're talking 1,000 a day, and we're processing probably at about a 50% efficiency rate. So that's 500 people a day that we were going to have to put on the streets. And we didn't put that many in the streets because, number one, the resources in Yuma and other places could not handle that. Fortunately,
You couldn't put 500 people on the streets here in McAllen. There just
No.
wouldn't be enough.
well, how do you tell the public we're here to keep you safe, but we're going to let these 500 people go? We took their fingerprints and we did a medical screening, but we don't really know what they have in their homeland if it didn't show up in ours. So we did everything we could to make sure that we vetted them at the best of our ability. But at the end of the day, if there's no room, we can't hold them beyond 72 hours. The local communities had to step up. And those are resources that for their own citizenry, to help the community, the food banks, the shelters, all that's there for the police force. Now we're adding people to that. And fortunately, like we saw today, the NGOs stepped up to help out. They've been doing that for quite a while here, but other places along the southwest border have had to step up. And it's really a drain on all services, medical services, police services. And of course, like I said, the food banks and the shelters are just, it overwhelms a small community, especially.
Was it you who gave the statistic that 13% of the people coming in have COVID?
That was something we heard earlier today. That was something that, obviously, we know the origins and what's going on. I mean, we talk about COVID, but I mean, we're just glad we have a name to some of the things that people are bringing across, right? Because they're on airlines coming around the world, flying into Mexico. Some of them are in stash houses in Mexico waiting to come across. We have rules that prevent communicable diseases from coming in. That's why they're supposed to come in through the ports of entry. So if you have signs of smallpox or chickenpox or TB, you're going to be quarantined. But when you come in illegally, you get brought into our stations. And, we also know some of these contagious communicable diseases don't always show symptoms right away.
Yeah.
So if I've got you in custody for 2 or 3 days and you haven't shown these symptoms and I have to release you, it's crazy.
So listen, everybody, if you want to ask a question, I forgot to mention this earlier, just go down to the bottom where it says Q&A and ask a question. And I understand we have a question online right now.
Yes, we have 2 online questions. One is, what were the years that you worked as the chief of border security?
So I was the chief in Yuma from December 2020 till December 31st, 2022. That was in Yuma as the chief. Prior to that, I was the deputy chief from April of 2018 until December of 2020 in El Paso, Texas. And then I spent a lot of time in different places over the last 27 years.
Thank you. And we have another online question. Did you lose staff after the Biden takeover, and how did that affect our security?
Well, so as far as staff, I mean, we had a lot of those that were eligible to retire. We did see an uptick in retirements, including myself. I was not mandatory, but I was ready to retire. We didn't. One of the issues, not just losing staff, because people, I mean, it's a government job. It's a good job. There's a esprit de corps with the agency. But we had a hard time over the last few years, like all law enforcement, recruiting retention law enforcement was a challenge. And those are the things we're trying to overcome, because, who wants to work for an organization where the president of the United States is calling you out and not supporting you? It can be a challenge. So we're working on that. We've had a lot more higher level of attrition over the last 2 years than we've had in the previous few years. And recruiting is still a challenge for all of us, and not just Border Patrol, but all law enforcement.
Can you talk a little bit about the cartels and some of your interactions with them?
Well, so I want to make sure I didn't interact with the cartels.
Okay.
Look at the cartels cover areas, right? They run geographic. Right here, south of us is the Gulf Cartel. Where I was at was the New Generation, the Jalisco Cartel, Legacy, Chapo Guzman. They control everything. We heard from a gentleman today talk about someone asked the question, are they all drug cartels? Yes and no, they're commodity neutral. It's about profit making for them. Anything to make a dollar. A lot of things in the past was narcotics because it was money. But as was mentioned earlier in the conversation today, was when you have narcotics, you have to get it across the border and you have to sell it. With people, and that's a big, huge change in today's world with smuggling, is the money's already there. They've already done things on their phone. They've already made arrangements, and if they can't pay it, they're going to pay it off. The cartels control that. And even somebody that is just trying to do the right thing and wants to make their way to the United States and they come through Mexico, they're going to have to pay. And one last thing on the cartels is, they're evil. they will get their hooks in somehow to our own youth on this side of the border, and it's hard to get out. In people that pay to get smuggled into the United States or to come into the United States through these smuggling corridors, they even have to have like money for service fees is the way I call it. It's like if concert tickets, $25.
Like a Ticketmaster?
Yeah, but by the time you're done, you paid $100 for a $25 ticket because you had to pay all these fees. The plaza bosses and the people that cover the different channels are charging as well.
And what's it cost to come in?
So in Yuma, and I can tell you this up until the last day that I worked, the average price ranged from $5,000 to $15,000 a head. And the prices go up depending on who you are, where you want to go. But, and again, this is not always, some people just don't have that kind of money. So they made arrangements to pay that off. And that's going to be where the trafficking gets really ugly. And you have indentured servitude, you have prostitution, you have all this going on, or extortion because they know where you live or your family that you left behind. We know where they are and we'll seize their property. So this is ugly. And so that's why I go back to policies. We need to be able to shut this enterprise down, force the hand of the source countries and the countries that they're passing through to say, to knock this off and kind of close this border down.
Now, talk about, you talked about releasing them kind of into the country and really how they just kind of would take over different areas. Can you talk about that at all?
Well, yeah, I can tell you that none of them are staying on the border. This is what is really eye-opening to so many people when they come down here is a border problem today is your backyard problem tomorrow.
And for our friends in Cincinnati and Columbus and Ohio, can you highlight that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll speak to what we learned today, right? The folks are coming in here. The Border Patrol is not going to be able to detain them any longer. Immigration is not going to be able to take them into custody. They're getting released to the charitable organization who's going to help make their arrangements, get them on a plane. They're going to fly right out of this McAllen airport and they're going to come into a city near you, mainly to the north or east. That's where a lot of people are showing up. Different demographics. I know like a lot of the Cuban nationals want to go to Florida because they have family ties there, but so many are going to the Northeast. And really it's only because that's where they're told to go. And I think, people lose sight of it because there's so much rhetoric that goes on. Is border security is national security. We're doing our best when we encounter somebody, but if there's no room, they're going to be released and they're going to get on a plane and they're going to show up where they want to show up. And if they say, hey, I want to go to Connecticut, if they want to go to Cincinnati, they're going to go to Cincinnati. And they've got about 30 to 60 days to check in with an immigration office there. And once they've checked in, I was talking to somebody today, their first hearing is in 2027.
Do the immigrants coming in just look at it like it's a big joke? Do they think it's funny that they just aren't even going to bother doing anything?
Yeah, I mean, you have some, right? And I don't want, because Washington loves to broad brush everything. I'm not going to do that because there are some people that are absolutely need our relief and the benefits that we can give somebody that but it's not the majority. I would tell you it's probably less than 10% would actually really meet those true asylum claims of religious and political persecution.
So you're saying that only 10% of the people that say they're coming here because they're persecuted are really
not finding a job in your home country is not a reason to pass through 7 asylum countries to come to the United States. They're coming here for the benefits and the relief that they get here.
We've got another online question for you.
We have an online question asking, do you have an approximate breakdown by nationality of people coming across the border? Have you noticed?
Well, that's a broad question, but I can tell you that I think the last year was 141 different countries. I know in Yuma it was 115 different countries. I can tell you this because I think it's often lost is this is not it used to be kind of a Mexico and Central American problem. Was the main demographics in the early 2000s and 2000 teens. It was a Mexican national problem for the majority of when it was seasonal workers coming through. They were coming illegally. Right now, they're coming from all over the world. All over the world. I mean, 115 different countries, just in my little section in Yuma. Here we learned today about over 140 different nationalities coming to Rio Grande Valley. Chinese, Russia, you name it. I mean, I'm you name it.
And do we have any idea for my friend Brian Thomas, why all the Chinese are coming?
I mean, we can only guess, right? I don't have any, and the information, I don't have anything that is classified. I wouldn't speak to that anyway. But, you have to wonder why now? Why all of a sudden are they fleeing? Because in the past, for Chinese nationals to escape and make an attempt, you used to have one or two people in these villages that say, hey, we're going to designate them as the ones to go to America. And it would literally $25,000, $50,000 to get them across in a ocean liner across. And so, communities and villages would pool their money together. Now you're seeing these people coming in. Well, they're flying into Mexico. Well, who's been having a relationship with Mexico lately? China,
Right.
South America. So they're coming in and working their way up. That's an odd one. And it's something I think that, while I don't want to, again, cast stones, it is a concern. Why single adults from China?
And somebody who spoke today said they were all women Chinese. So I don't know why, but can you tell everyone that story you told us about the Biden bean counter that talked to you about computer time?
Yeah. So we were that one still kind of gets me, but so we were the busiest station or sector in the nation at the time. And we were putting requirements as setting up processing facilities, adding more computers, more stations, because it takes anywhere, depending on how efficient our agents are or the processing people are, anywhere from an hour to 2 hours to do a full case. And that's a full case is one person. So they gave us all these computers and they set it all up and they sent all the tech people down there to get it. And we had 40 processing computers set up. Problem is they didn't send anybody to sit behind those processing computers, because I was catching 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 people a day. And everybody that comes in our custody, and this is important as part of the story, has to get physically screened to make sure they don't have any weapons or narcotics or contraband, medically screened. We have to offer them a snack, food, any of this kind of stuff. We have to go through all their property. Well, that takes resources in the form of agents to do all that. So they were running the behind the scenes, looking at computer usage, and was like, hey, your numbers are, you're not using all your computers. What's going on down there in Yuma? We get you those, like, you didn't give me anybody to man the computers. Well, we notice it's down on weekends. I was like, well, I've pulled my entire staff, the admin staff that's working Monday through Friday, and I've got them working overtime on the evening hours, and they need to have time off. And this wave is not ending. So I'm not gonna crush my workforce any further and make somebody that works administrative hours to come work on the weekends to process quicker. So send me more people or stop checking my computer usage. And I called the person out. I said, that's what happens when you spend your entire career in a little small sector. You never saw the big picture. And anyway, I'd love to meet him in an alley one day and have that conversation. But that guy was a Border Patrol agent, and he's just getting top down pressure. He's trying to find a reason because the White House is wanting to know why, numbers are not moving as quick. I was like, well, we're catching more in Yuma, where I was. We're catching more aliens every day than I had personnel on the books. It's a math problem then.
Yeah. So last question for you. Have you just kind of made a decision to make it the rest kind of a life mission to see this situation righted?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, it's in my DNA, right? I mean, I've been doing this for so long. It's been a great job. I'm very proud of the work we did. I was proud of my work.
Shows.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. But I mentioned it earlier, this administration is more about securing their narrative than securing the border. And I want to kind of at least offer facts. You can take the facts and do whatever you want to do with it. But I'm going to do my best to educate, influence, and inform on the facts. I can spend all day giving my opinion, but we all have opinions. I want people to recognize that there's a problem here with what's happening at our border. It's impacted our workforce. Although we're very resilient and we're strong, it makes it a challenge that the American people are suffering because the vulnerabilities that are created by dealing with this mess at the border, where our agents should be focusing on the true bad actors, the criminal smuggling, the narcotics seizing, and something I mentioned today, we need to focus on being Tall fences for security and wide gates for lawful, legal trade, travel, and tourism to let people in. And so, yeah, I want to do my part to make my experience available so people can be better informed, because I'm not running for an office. I'm not running for a position. Those folks talking platitudes so much. I'm giving you facts, and you can do what you want with the
We've
facts.
got another question.
We have 2 online questions. One person just want to thank you so much for coming on. They were in El Centro and for a Christmas parade a few years back, and the Border Patrol, Sheriff's Department, and police got the most applause. A few minutes ago, you talked about the asylum countries, 7 asylum countries. Do you can you explain what the 7 asylum countries were that someone might have passed through?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to go back to someone to give them the shout out to on the Christmas parades. That's one thing that is often lost, right? So the national media, national elected officials want to, villainize and the Border Patrol, and, they're bad, Border Patrol bad. The local communities embrace us, because we're part of their community. Our kids go to their school. We go to their churches. We eat at their restaurants. Places like El Paso, Texas, where the Border Patrol started in 1924. You'll be hard pressed to find a El Pasoan that doesn't know a Border Patrol agent personally or have someone in their family. So small communities like El Centro, California, they embrace the Border Patrol because they know the truth. Without the Border Patrol agents, there'd be a lot more chaos going on there. As far as the asylum countries, the list is a mile long, but the way the international asylum rules, which the UN codifies, and we're one of those countries that signed off on it, is if you're seeking asylum, you are supposed to seek refuge in the first country you set foot in.
First country.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so when you fly from India to Germany, Germany's an asylum country. Through London, England's an asylum country. To Mexico, that's an asylum country. And then you come to the United States, and as soon as Border Patrol catches you, like, I want asylum. You see, that's where we called out the nonsense and the loopholes of some of these laws that they were doing. Because asylum is there's 2 ways. There's an affirmative claim where you actually fill out an application. It's an I-595 that you fill out saying, I want to seek asylum. You do that proactively. Then there is the credible fear defensive claim, which is what all these people, they've crossed the border illegally. They're set up for removal proceedings. And we ask them if they have fear of return. And if they say yes, they can use asylum as a defense, and they have to make their claim that, well, I'm being persecuted. Well, again, you're not doing that because if you really were fleeing, you would have done it in other places. The law says regardless of status. And people like to hone in on that. Well, if they're here illegally, the law says regardless of status. Well, I don't think that's the best example. The intent behind that, and the way I understand it, is let's look at what's happening in world events right now. There's a war going on in Ukraine. If you're a student here in the United States on a student visa from the Ukraine, and you just finished your semester and you graduate and you want to go back, but there's a war going on and your visa expired. So now you're here illegally. By policy, your visa is no longer good. You're expired. You're out of status. You're illegal. You seek asylum. Regardless of your status, you can apply for asylum because we don't want you to go back into a war-torn Ukraine.
Right.
We want you to stay here. That's what that means. You don't get to rob a bank and then when you get caught with the money, say, well, I'd like to apply for a loan. That's what I was doing, because that's what's happening here. They get caught and like, hey, I want asylum.
Yeah.
Well,
Last quick question, Chief.
problem is right now is we're giving them the loan and then letting them go.
Yeah.
What optimism do you have for what we are experiencing with the border and immigration going forward? And if so, why?
Well, I believe in the American people, and I believe in the Border Patrol agents that I worked alongside for so many years, that we're going to get this right. We're just like anything else in life. We're going to have our ups and downs, but it is really groups like AFP, it's people like you all here today, bringing the issues to light and talking about them and talking to real people that have lived it, talking to leaders in the communities.
Will you
talking-
tell everyone out there who's listening tonight how important it is that they talk to 5 of their friends about what's going on down here?
Yeah, I absolutely would encourage you all to talk to everybody that you know that's willing to listen about the things you've heard about what's happened at the border, whether it's from me or from other credible sources, and have that conversation, because we are at a point where if we don't act on what's happening and just slow this down and try to regain our footing at the border, we're going to wake up one day and it's going to be hardly recognizable what's going on with this country. We look at all the threats that are happening around the world. I'll just remind you, outside a congressionally declared act of war where our military would defend us, it's your border patrol agents that are defending your 2,000 miles of your southern border, your 1,500 miles of coastal border, and your 3,000 miles of Canadian border. So we have to defend our sovereignty. We have to defend our country, and we have to be able to say, look, we need to secure this border, and we need to get back to the table on doing what's right immigration wise. But there should be no argument in securing the border. And I'll say this last thing. Securing the border doesn't mean build a wall for 2,000 miles on the southwest border. It's where it makes sense. It makes sense in the urban environments where they can vanish within two to 3 seconds or 2 to 3 minutes. I don't need it in the middle of nowhere if I don't have the requisite resources to back that up. So it is about, there are solutions out there. There are policies out there that will help us do this job. And again, I believe in the Border Patrol, and I believe in the will of the American people, that they're waking up and realizing this. And we're gonna remain optimistic. I'm gonna remain optimist on this, and think that we're gonna get there.
And the job is doable if we could just throw out the government, right? Federal government.
Yeah, there are a lot
Chief,
of,
thank you
lot
so
of things
much.
that'll
You
be better,
are
right?
great. I know everybody's just clapping out there so much for you. Thanks for coming
You're
on.
welcome. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Really appreciate it. And George Brenneman, we're going to bring on George. Hey, Leon, I don't know if you can pull back up our PowerPoint with that picture of Othell Brand Jr., because I want George to explain what we weren't able to get his video processed. I'm so sorry about that. It was an incredible video. We're going to put it online tomorrow. This is the guy who directed the waterworks. Yeah, that's it, Leanne. So you're going to see this picture of Othell Brand Jr. And George, could you explain to people, and this is my friend, George Brenneman. We've known each other forever. So glad to have him on the team today. Explain what Othell Brand Jr. is saying.
Yeah, so this was probably one of the 2 or 3 things that stood out most from what we saw today. And what Othell was talking about was his people, his employees, himself. This is his property. And what he's demonstrating is what happens when you show up and there's already cartel people on your property. He said that this has become the universal sign that the cartel will flash to you. And that is they hold out both their arms and basically they say, what are you doing here? In other words, it's time for you to take a 30-minute coffee break, get away from us, let us finish our cartel business, and then come back when we're gone. So it just struck me as odd that the border is so insecure that the only operation or only reaction you can have as a property owner is you have to leave your property while they go about the cartel business. And so this is his land. I don't know if you mentioned, but if he's standing next to a boat ramp, he built the boat ramp with his own money and his own people, because they had 5 bodies in the water and they were told by Border Patrol, we can't get a boat out there because we don't have anywhere nearby to launch a boat into the Rio Grande. So he had to build a boat ramp so that they could then facilitate when people get stuck and die in the middle of the river, that's what they needed to do. He's got a helicopter ramp there, which you can see on the right-hand side of the picture there. And he built the facility you see up there on the left of the screen, where you can, behind that bush there is a single Border Patrol agent. So he built all this with his own money, his own people. But yet if he encounters anybody from the cartel, they flash him that sign and everybody just takes off and leaves because that's their only choice.
It was amazing really to hear from him. Check EmpowerUamerica.org, hopefully tomorrow, for that video. It's really something. But we had, at the end of the day, we had just an incredible chance to go to a Catholic charity And the name of that Catholic charity was called
Catholic Charities,
Catholic
RGV.
Charities, RGV. And George, I'm going to let you tell people about what we saw there.
So one of the things you are preconditioned about is how children are treated. And so what has happened is this is not a government facility, although I do believe they get some government funding. It's Catholic Charities, Rio Grande Valley. And so what happens is once a family comes into the United States, they get processed and they're saying, hey, we have sponsors in the United States that are willing to take us in, their family or friends or acquaintances that are willing to take these families that have made it across the border. But what happens is once Border Patrol says, okay, you're free to go, they literally just dump them on the street corner. And so they had no way to get to where they were supposedly going to meet their sponsors. So I do not remember the name of the nun that started this organization. So basically what this place does is they process up to 1,200 people, families. They won't take, individuals or just, adult males. It's all families. And they help them fill out the paperwork, get their tickets, and see that they're on their way. So they say that they can handle up to 1,200. The average time in this building is 24 to 48 hours, although some people were stuck there later. It is not a government facility. So there are no fences. There's no, they aren't in cages. They are sleeping on mattresses on the floor. One of the people we talked to, Leanne, do you have that video? Or are we going to be able to show that? I talked to one of the Franciscan priests there, Father Louis, who was talking about, the way they have to help these kids. They're just trying to make them feel less frightened than just getting dumped out on the street. And so you'll hear in the background, I apologize for the sound, but there's a lot of noise because there are a lot of kids running around. They're making paper airplanes and trying to get it stuck in the ceiling. They're doing what kids do. While we were there,
It was just a real joy to watch them.
it was great because it wasn't what you've been led to believe about kids in cages.
And the tenderness from these people at this charity. And I just want to tell everybody, George, it's CatholicCharitiesRGV.org. If anybody wants to make a contribution, that's a great thing.
Yeah, they're doing great work. You could see once you got used to what was in the room. So as you walk in, there is a large painting or idol of Our Lady of Guadalupe. I believe many of these are Catholics. Although they will take in anyone, you don't have to be Catholic to get into this facility. They had a mass going on in the other room when we were there. They had some kids sleeping on the floor, but then they had like 3 areas inside this large building. And what the 3 areas were is one was the registration center. The other was a set of tables to get your paperwork in order. And then the third was they were watching Pirates of the Caribbean, which is a cool movie. But so the kids are all running around. They got coloring books and paper to make airplanes. They have a cafeteria. So, I mean, it felt to me almost like you were in a regular Catholic undercroft where you were just having fun with the kids.
Okay, we're going to try to show that video.
Okay,
George.
let's give it a
So,
shot.
we're gonna
Again, I apologize.
Okay, so
for the
let me
noise.
tell everybody. So when we built our day today, we allowed about 3 hours to get this whole thing produced that we're putting on. We didn't allow enough time to edit video. So sorry about that, everybody. But here you go. Here you go. Oh, it looks good.
Seeing here, so it depends. Sometimes it's a really low number, like 20 people, 30 people, or up to over 1,000. But that depends on the dynamic here at the border, the rules and regulations that are implemented by the government, all kinds of things.
Okay, so what's the main issue you see when people are coming through? Is it just finding where their families are in the United States? Or?
Yeah, trying to get proper transportation to get to their families as quickly as possible. Nobody wants to stay here on the border. They've got family in Chicago or New York. They've got family in other parts of Texas. So trying to get them the proper tickets, to either fly or take a bus to get to their family.
Okay, so what is the biggest service you provide beyond taking care of them so they're not on the streets while they're waiting for their transportation?
Well, that is, previously the border security had dropped people off at the bus station and left them there without the So they would just leave families right there on the street. So, and that was because there was nowhere else to bring them. But then in 2014 is when Catholic Charities moved in to really start hosting people. So that's a huge help. I mean, there's no other resources in this area where people are doing that.
So there is no government organization helping people. It's all charities and people helping people.
Nonprofits and church groups.
Wow. Well, thank you for your time and thank you for all you're doing.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, it was a crushing to see the way the people are in there, in that, you know, they're kind of stuck in this no man's land until they can find relatives or friends or sponsors. But it was nice to see that it was a clean facility, and nobody seemed, I mean, you can tell the kids are homesick. A lot of them are just walking around.
And one of the things the woman, and I'm sorry, I can't remember her name, that talked to us, she talked about how important it was to restore the dignity of the people that for 4 days or 5 days had been battered around between one place or another. And the other thing that really surprised me was about everyone has to have a sponsor before they can leave. And she said a lot of people do, but she said some people just put a name on the sponsorship form, and then the sponsors don't have the money to take them to where they need to go. And this group has to find them a sponsor before they can get them out somewhere. And I just thought, what a hard job that's got to be.
Right. I mean, apparently a large percentage of them just grab names out of the phone book and stick that name and address, and they say, this is our sponsor. And you can imagine that that's what's going on. But the other interesting thing was, before we went into the building, someone had asked, I don't know if it was Chief Clem or someone else, you know, what about unaccompanied minors? And that's a major issue. And what's interesting is they were saying most of the kids come across the border and either sewed into their clothing or pinned to their clothing is a name, phone number, or address. That's it. These kids are dropped off with nothing more. The other thing he was saying is they had a case where this little boy came in, and they all kind of looked at him and said, I could swear we've seen this kid before. And they did some checking, and sure enough, this little boy had gone through the same facility 3 different times with 3 different groups of parents.
Wow.
So in other words, this poor kid was getting used kind of like his own coyote, where these adults needed to have a family in order to get across the border. And so they literally used this kid over and over in the same place until finally somebody recognized him and said, what is going on?
Well, we're kind of rounding third, and we just have a few minutes left. So I'm gonna do something I've never done before. We've got Betty here with us. We've got Leanne with us. And we'll go ahead and ask the one question first before I throw it to you guys.
There's 2 kind of questions, if you could clarify
yeah.
for us. One person is asking, I think we can answer this because we kind of learned this today. The people who cross and are between the water's edge and the fence that Texas has set up, what happens to them? So
Same thing. It's as if they made it across the fence as well. As once they're on American territory, they are, quote, arrested, taken to the border security place and processed. And like Chief was saying, they've got so many that's a slow process.
And that's the point where I was talking before you came in about 1/3 of them end up going back to where they came from, but about 2/3 of them are just released into the country. What's the second question?
they're asking, are you promoting Catholic Charities when they make illegal border crossing an easier process?
No, we're not promoting.
We're not promoting the illegal process. I kind of thought of it entirely the other way. And I apologize for not addressing that earlier on, because what you see here is the fact that what was happening prior to this organization, Catholic Charities RGV, what was happening prior to that is the government agencies just dumped them on the street by themselves. And there were a lot of very small children in this facility.
Mostly children. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Very young. I'm saying barely walking. Right. So what the government was doing is just dropping them and saying somebody else's problem. And this group has stepped in to handle that problem. There are other things Catholic Charities is doing that specifically in Cincinnati. They facilitate a lot of the travel to Cincy. But in this particular case, they're filling a gap that should have been filled before you opened the border to let these people come across?
So I'm going to do it now. I'm going to throw it out to the team, and Betty and Leanne and George. Any observations you want to make as we're kind of closing up? Betty, you haven't had a chance to say anything. Anything you want to throw out there that you saw today that just really surprised you?
I saw a lot of things today. It was very educational. I feel really privileged to be here. I, like George, I was in with the Catholic Charities. They had a job for each one of us to do when we were done, and I chose the job to play with the kids. So I flew airplanes today, and I had this cute little boy. He just couldn't get enough airplanes, and it was just great to do that.
How about you, Leanne?
This was an amazing opportunity as well. And it was a hot day, but we got a lot done. We saw a lot of things today. It was cool just to get the hands-on experience. We could go and almost touch the fences of the wall. And another thing, I know we just got a lot of questions about the charities because we were talking about it. From what I believe, they were all of them, the families in there were passed legally. Was that correct?
No, they were all illegals.
Okay.
Unfortunately. And that's what Chief Clem was saying. We need tall fences and wide gates. To me, the thing that was really hard to grasp is when you hear about walls or fences, you think of like your house. And if you're going to build a fence, you build the fence around the whole property, right? They literally drop these fences for 200 feet and then nothing on either side. So that we're just sitting there seeing, spots of fences next to where you just walk right through.
It was crazy.
It was absolutely
It was crazy
lunacy.
seeing it.
And the fact that they referred to the fence by the president that allowed it to be built was a bit strange. Oh, that's a Trump fence or a Bush fence.
Somebody
But
that's
there were no Biden fences.
somebody that's a little OCD like me just couldn't put up with that. I couldn't live down here. I don't think if I'd see these fences joining together. But any last observations?
So to follow my final thing on the fence is I was trying to think of an analogy that made sense for what our government is doing here. And basically they're dropping a brick into the middle of the Mississippi River and saying, this is going to slow down the flow. There's nothing slowing down the flow right now. It's absolutely crazy. I guess the other thing that was kind of interesting is we never saw anything active. In a couple of the photos that'll be online, especially right down by that boat ramp, if you looked across the way, there was a dirt path that led to the river. That river is only 500 feet wide and 5 feet deep. So when you think of the river, you think of like the Ohio. I can't swim across that. This, you don't need to swim. You just walk.
So kind of in closing, I wanted to tell everyone who the two winners were. Karen P., you're the online winner of the Ronald Reagan book, The Greatest Communicator. And then I think a friend of mine won the other book, the George Washington is a badass book. And his name is Richard D. And he is quite a badass himself. Sorry to say, but so the elephant in the room is, I think the four of us, when we got on that plane and came here today, we expected them to take us somewhere where we would see thousands of people crossing the border and we'd have these great pictures. Well, the bottom line is we didn't see that today. I don't know if it was because it was so hot. We had a representative, Flores, that we were supposed to meet, and she couldn't come for some reason. I don't know if it was hot, if what exactly the situation was, but what I can tell you is we sure learned a lot. I mean, when you listen to somebody like Chief Clem, and you hear what he's done and you don't listen to what he's done, it's embarrassing that we can't do better. And that's why it's so important that you go out and you do your part and you talk it up and you raise heck and you let people know that we can do better than this. This is a great country we have, and this is just an embarrassment that we have to put up with this. And at what point is our country going to be, it'll just be 3 or 4 years from now, 10% of our population will be people we don't know who they are, that we're paying to learn. They talked about teachers having to learn Haitian and Creole and just all sorts of languages to teach our kids. It just didn't seem to be a good way to go. So I encourage you to go out and talk about it. And mostly I encourage you to go out tonight, have a great night, and go out and empower you. Thanks for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it.